The German Army Group Nord was expected to conquer Leningrad in 4 weeks by July 21st, 1941. Leningrad was to be the first great Soviet city to fall. In all her long history, Leningrad had never been invaded. Now her children prepared to defend her. In the very first days of the war, hundreds of thousands of Leningraders enlisted for military service. They were formed into units of Opolchenia, the Home Guard, ill-trained, ill-armed. More had volunteered, but could not be spared from vital war industry plants. They marched off confidently, almost all of them to their deaths. They were fighting for time to build defenses. A first line of defense was gouged from the earth at Luga, 125 miles west of the city. It would stop the Germans for a few weeks. There was a second line at Gachina, some 20 miles outside the city. The innermost line of barricades, 22 miles long, ran along the city limits. Leningraders would be able to walk to the front line, just a block or two from the last streetcar stop. The defense lines were built by men and women, many of whom were unused to physical labor. Many of them middle-aged, not a few of them in their late 60s and 70s. The white kerchiefs of the women made them easy targets. Low-flying Nazi planes took a heavy toll of the unarmed men and women as they labored in the fields. Air attacks on Leningrad had begun September 6th, but the first intensive raid was September 8th. That day's air raid destroyed the Badaev warehouses, the city's main stockpile of food. Hitler issued a secret directive. He ordered Leningrad erased from the face of the earth by bombers and heavy artillery. After the defeat of Soviet Russia, there would be no more reason for Leningrad's continued existence, he said. Should there be any offer of surrender, it was to be refused. In Leningrad, 60,000 men and women volunteered to support the regular civil defense units. The city's anti-aircraft fire was effective, and warnings came in good time. So the casualties from bombing and shelling were kept comparatively low. The winter had come early in 1941, and it would be severe. It added to Leningrad's trials. In December, the streetcar system ground to a halt. For Leningraders, in those bitter days of 1941, everything was at stake. Life, honor, happiness. They and the city they loved would be judged by how they responded to this mortal challenge. The city water mains froze solid. Pipes burst in apartments. Water had to be hauled from holes chopped in the ice of the Neva River. Blockaded, Leningrad had hardly enough food to sustain life. Bread was made from wood cellulose and the dust from flour mills, mixed with cottonseed cake, as bitter as quinine. The ration was 2 slices a day, 4.5 ounces. They mixed cookies out of carpenter's glue and fried them in turpentine or paint. By now, people were scraping the wallpaper off their walls to eat the paste. To lose a ration card meant almost certain death. The city was dying, but the Leningraders didn't understand that. They had little food, little light, little heat, but they carried on their intellectual life. Dmitri Shostakovich was finishing his 7th symphony. He called it his Leningrad Symphony. It was to be performed in Leningrad in the Philharmonic's damaged concert hall, while German shells still burst outside. The musicians came from the front line for the occasion. In November, the hunger deaths began. They would reach a total of more than 600,000 before the siege ended. The elderly went first, quietly. Men died before women, then teenagers. Death could come at any moment, in any place. Even to infants, gone before they had a chance to live. In spite of the hardships, most of the plants in Leningrad continued to turn out munitions. The plant manager remembers.
Above all, when you recall it, you're astonished by the firm belief people had in their victory. You know, it seemed at the time when things were so hard, there were no grounds at all for such a belief. Take evacuation, for instance. It was a much more difficult problem than trying to get supplies to the front line. It was hard to persuade people to leave the city. They just wouldn't move. They said, "We'll win. We'll beat the enemy soon. I'm not moving any place." Even today, I can't really understand some things. I keep remembering one of the foremen. He said, "I know I'll die in 3 or 4 days." I said, "What nonsense are you talking? Why on earth will you be dead in 3 or 4 days?" But he did. 3 or 4 days later, he died.
These wary people sensed the moment their stamina would give out completely. In those days, you needed greater courage to live than to die. People worked long shifts, 16, 20 hours, in spite of the hunger and cold. As Leningrad history put it, at night the occasional flicker of fires and the red flash of exploding artillery shells lighted the gloom of the vast factories. But the Leningraders seemed to possess an indestructible will to survive. Leningrad is not afraid of death, they said. Death is afraid of Leningrad. The Christmas parties in Leningrad were held in bomb-proof shelters. Every child got a present, a sad little lump of coarse black bread. In Russia, heirs to the outcome of this titanic struggle. Winter unexpectedly opened a road to salvation. Lake Ladoga, north of Leningrad, was open on one side. The question was, would the lake freeze solidly enough this year to support the trucks? The ice held. The convoys brought food in and took people out. The Leningraders began to call it the Road of Life. But it took 3 days of convoys to supply Leningrad for a single day. Early in January 1942, Leningrad was still on the knife edge of survival. Never had the city been closer to starvation. It was the most frightful period of the siege. But what did come in saved many lives. Convoys continued for as long as they could, as long as the ice beneath would hold during the thaw, even though some trucks vanished through shell holes they could not see. of 1942 brought new hope, but it did not erase the memories. The city began to stir. It was not a rebirth, just a reaffirmation of life. People were very weak from lack of food, some so feeble that their bodies could not accept the nourishment they were given. They died of eating. But now the Leningraders attacked the mountains of rubble. The streetcars went back on their tracks. In one way, the city had been fortunate. In spite of the effects of starvation, there were no epidemics, as everyone had feared. It was as if the people would not allow themselves to be sick. As the spring began, the starving people renewed their battle for survival. Freighters reappeared on Lake Ladoga. A pipeline was laid on the bed of the lake to bring in oil. Motorboats towed in tanks full of fuel. More fuel came in along ramps now underwater. The city squares sprouted vegetable gardens. Every inch of soil available was put under cultivation, even close to the front line. The children were the first to be evacuated across Lake Ladoga, under fire. This woman was an eyewitness.
When we came near, we saw the white things drifting. It was small white caps, the children's caps, and they drifted on, many of them. A woman said, "The children, the evacuees, the children." Everyone got so frantic. The pilot, the Nazi pilot, he knew who he was dropping his bombs on women and children. A woman burst out crying. She was almost crazy. Then she fainted. Her daughter was aboard that ship. The grown-ups' hearts were broken. That was the first time I cried, when I saw all those small white caps drifting along there on the Neva.
"1944 was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Its debts were coming due. For the Red Army, 1944 was the year of predominance. Everywhere, from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Red Army battered forward. Hitler had conquered other cities in days, other countries in weeks. Leningrad had defied him, invincible. Now she would reply. The first major Soviet offensive launched nearly 200,000 men on two fronts on the Germans in their defensive positions of concrete and steel, some 3 stories deep in the ground. When the Russian pincers met, they had punched a corridor to the outside. Leningrad was no longer an island. The 900-day siege of Leningrad, the longest ever endured by a modern city, had come to an end. The Nazis had left hundreds of thousands of Leningraders homeless, destroyed 526 schools, 101 museums, 71 bridges, 1,000 factories, inflicted $80 billion worth of physical destruction, taken 1 million lives. The poet Olga Berkowitz wrote, "From the place of death and ashes will rise the garden as before. I firmly believe in miracles. You gave me that belief, my Leningrad." No disaster ever visited on a city exceeds in magnitude or intensity the suffering of those 900 days. Mama, I returned the bread that you gave me.